Hi, y'all. We are back in the Landmark History of the American People, Chapter 21. And we've got a picture there of Homestead, Pennsylvania in 1920. The Homestead Steel Works. And we're going to learn a little bit about what happens when you have a company that gives every employee their employment, but also the land and the land and the houses and all that kind of stuff. So the American West was known for its instant cities. Even before the Civil War, these grew quickly if they happened to be located at way stations where the westward travelers passed, at the unions of riverways, on lake ports or railroad terminals, or near new mines. Man, I'm starting off that really poorly. Sorry about that. As these cities grew, their boosters competed with each other to attract new settlers. The new settler, of course, would be new customers. Each city hoped to become bigger and better than all the others. Some of them, Cincinnati, Chicago, Denver, Omaha, Kansas City, and others, became the great cities of the new Middle West or Midwest. But after the Civil War, the whole country became more citified, and new kinds of instant cities grew up. These had not been way stations on the road west. You could find these new cities all over the country. So it used to be that you just get these cities near where the railroad line stopped, but now you're getting them all over the place. You could find these new cities all over the country. At first, they wanted not to grow big, but to stay small. They wanted to escape the troubles of the crowded metropolis. Businessmen, real estate developers, and others actually planned these cities, and they had common patterns. Businessmen looked for new places to put their factories. Workers wanted to escape the dumbbell tenements and the darkened, crowded cities. Prosperous merchants, lawyers, and doctors were eager to raise their families out in the open air. So they would kind of start a new city away from the big city. Of course, we know how well that's going to work, right? With the new railroad network, there was less reason than ever for factories to stay in big cities. Almost everywhere along a railroad line would do. After all, you could bring raw materials in from anywhere, and you could transport finished products to any place. So why not build company towns? If an industrialist built his factory away from the big city, the workers would not have to live in slums. Where land was so much less expensive, each worker could have an attractive little house with his own garden. And you see those houses there. On a good day, Homestead, Pennsylvania could look the way you see it on page 136. Far too regularly, however, the air was not so clear because these are near a factory. So workers who had escaped the city slums found themselves living in a pall of smoke from the furnaces. So now I'm on page 138. The employer could provide parks and playgrounds, and workers might be more content. Many energetic businessmen had this idea after the Civil War. In 1881, Andrew Carnegie, a go-getting steel industrialist, built a steel plant in a whole new town called Homestead, 7 miles up the Monongahela. So that's pronounced, it says on the bottom there, Monongahela. Whoosh, baby. River from Pittsburgh. Besides small houses for the workers and their families, Carnegie provided a library and even bowling alleys. Homestead was not beautiful, but at least it lacked the crowds and the filth of the city slums. George M. Pullman, inventor of the Pullman sleeping car for railroads, also decided to build a new town. It was 10 miles outside Chicago. In 1884, he bought a tract of land on the shores of Lake Calumet. He named it after himself and hoped it would be a model for other company towns. Pullman's architect designed the whole town, including a central square with town halls, churches, a library, and parks. All the buildings, including the small houses for the workers, were of dark red brick. Then in 1893, Granite City was founded outside St. Louis to manufacture graniteware pottery. The Diamond March Company and the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company built company towns near Akron, Ohio. The United States Steel Company built Gary, Indiana, not far from Chicago, in 1905. They named the town after Albert Henry Gary, the head of the company. Company towns sprang up all over the country. Workers escaped the worst horrors of the big city in these towns, but they found some new horrors. Living in a company town was something like being a serf in the Middle Ages. The company not only controlled your job, but it decided where you could live and where, at what price you could buy your food. The company controlled your schools and even hired your police. Some of the most violent strikes took place in these company towns. When the Carnegie Steel Company cut wages at its Homestead plant in 1892, the angry workers went on strike. 12 men died in the resulting violence. The Pullman Company cut wages during the business depression of 1893, but it kept its rents just as high as they had been before the depression. The whole town went on strike against the company, and the strike paralyzed the nation's railroads for months. For Americans who wanted to run their own lives, the company town was a spiritual failure. But the company town was not the only new-style instant city that appeared at the end of the 1800s. Besides company towns, the Garden City appeared on the suburban frontier. An English reformer, Ebenezer Howard, had come to America as a young man. He had spent 5 years around crowded Chicago and tried to design a suburban utopia. That's like a dreamland. His book, Garden Cities of Tomorrow, in 1898, was his blueprint for what he figured would be a better life. Howard wanted to combine the best features of the city and the country. He urged people to group together to build new small towns out in the country. These towns, he said, should be planned with a garden belt all around. Then, if a railroad could connect this new garden city to the big city, it would give its residents the best of both worlds. Some rich men who owned summer houses in the country near cities began living out in the suburbs year-round. For example, some businessmen who worked in New York City preferred living in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, about 45 minutes away, on the railroad. Since there was not enough traffic to persuade the railroad to stop there, they would hop on or off the train outside Old Greenwich as it slowed down for a bridge. By the 1880s, when enough New York businessmen were living there, they built their own railroad station, and the train stopped for them. These rich suburban pioneers built their own country clubs and tried to keep their communities exclusive for oldcomers. Soon, other Americans began following Ebenezer Howard's advice. They built garden cities like his, but they were no longer only for the very rich, though they were not yet for people of modest means either. Lake Forest outside Chicago and Shaker Heights outside Cleveland showed a special effort to make the Garden City more romantic than the big city. Instead of the monotonous parallel streets of checkerboard city blocks, Garden City streets wound up and down the hills and by the trees of the countryside. Wide lawns separated the houses from the roads and from one another. Before long, garden cities like Radburn, New Jersey were being specially planned for people of modest income. In 1910, a New York architect made a new design for space-saving garden apartments with kitchenettes, a new American word for a compact kitchen and pantry. Now you no longer needed to be rich to live out in the garden suburbs. And this is his diagram of the way the cities should look. This was Ebenezer Howard's diagram. So that is a short chapter 21, and I'll have some more information for you and some more things in the section for you to do.